we're moving now to the whole formation of Islam. Because listen, everybody is convinced now that the 9th and 10th century narratives, or the standard Islamic narrative and the Islamic traditions, completely have it wrong. There's an agenda. They're only interested in their agenda, the Abbasid agenda, which is from Baghdad, hundreds of miles away and hundreds of years later. But what then happened? So what really went on? How did Islam begin? What are its origins? What was going on there in the 7th and 8th century? And you're going to do that. It's great to be able to have you come on board now. Tell us what the Germans are finding concerning how Islam began, the formation of Islam. That's what we're looking at. Since we know it, we can't trust those traditions. How then did it happen? Without any further ado, I leave it to you.
All right. So what happens next, though, is that under Muawiyah, the caliphate turns into the enemy of the Byzantine Empire, right? So initially, those client kings, they were allied with the Byzantines. Then after Heraclius dies, they sort of move away, and now they're fully opposed to the Byzantine Empire for obvious reasons, right? So that now they are the new empire on the playing field, and when there's a new empire, there's always basically there's always a war with the old one. Never goes without it. But there's a second thing, and it's he's now also ruling over Persia, and Persia is the ancient arch enemy of the Byzantines. And there's a lot of pressure from the east of his empire to finally avenge the defeat, destroy Constantinople, and basically do what the Sassanids couldn't do. And indeed, he does prepare a major siege on Constantinople. This time, he actually goes about it in a pretty thought out manner. He builds a fleet, and his fleet actually beats the Greek fleet, which was a major shock. And at that point, everybody thought Constantinople would fall. But then in the actual battle for Constantinople, his fleet is completely destroyed. It's the first time that the Greek fire was used, and it obliterated his fleet. And eventually he had to agree to a peace treaty and also pay tributes to the Byzantine Empire, which immediately led to maybe not technically an uprising, but his position was now absolutely in danger. And indeed, what we see is that in the east now, Ibn al-Zubayr is named leader of commander of the faithful. So basically, Muawiyah loses the east, and his empire fractures. And then around 681, Muawiyah is disposed, and we don't know how or what or how exactly this works. Was he assassinated? Was he pushed out? Did he die of natural causes? I don't know. Did he retire? We don't know. But what we do know is that then Abd al-Malik comes in. So none of the, like in the traditional story, we first have his son, and then we have Marwan. Yeah. Also, we have no evidence for any of that, but we do have evidence for Abd al-Malik coming in, which is actually a bit earlier than in the standard Islamic narrative. And that's something, what I found interesting when I first read it, is we do have coins of Abd al-Malik right when he got into power, so right around 681. And when people found those coins, archaeologists looked at those coins, they said, oh, this doesn't agree with the standard Islamic narrative, so those dates must be different. So they thought, well, he can't have been caliph, so the dates on those coins must be according to the Persian dating system, which would still be using the last Persian king as year 0, which would be 12 years later, like which would be 634 instead of 622, and now it fits again, even though the last Persian king was long dead. So that really doesn't make sense. So basically, if you find a coin where the date fits, they say, oh, yeah, that's the Arabic dating system. And when they find a coin where the date doesn't fit, they say, oh, that's the Persian dating system, because they're going backwards. They're using instead of using the coins to verify the standard narrative. They use the standard narrative to verify the coins, basically. Even though the coins are hard evidence, and the other one is story told centuries later. Right?
Yeah, yeah. You always go with the evidence on the ground.
Exactly. So in 690, Abd al-Malik's brother Aziz is Emir of Egypt, and he has an inscription made on a bridge in Fustat, which is the new capital of Egypt. And inscription reads, "This bridge was commissioned by the governor Abd al-Aziz. O God, bless him in his affairs, strengthen his rule as you see fit, and cheer him, himself, and his entourage. Amen." So it ends with an Amen, which tells us, yeah, well, must have been a Christian inscription, because Muslims don't use that. So it seems like the brother of Abd al-Malik was a Christian. Now, Abd al-Malik himself had the Dome of the Rock built, and in it we have this inscription, which we will look at in more detail in a later video. I just want to briefly go over it. This inscription indicates, or has, among other things, the word Muhammad in it, and it clearly identifies Jesus as the Muhammad being the one who is to be praised. So it says, "Praised be Jesus," basically, or "Praised be the messenger of God." And then in the next verse, it says, "Jesus is the messenger of God." So it's pretty straightforward, but we will look at this in more detail. Christoph Luxemburg has done a great job again on this one. But what I also want you to look at is if there's anything, maybe Jay, is there anything maybe that strikes you when you look at the mosaic below the inscription here, in the light of what we talked about the last time?
Well, I don't see anything that stands out. What am I
if you look at the fruits, what you see is grapes. You see grapes everywhere.
The grapes are there. You're right. That's the grapes.
Basically, the huris.
These are the huris of heaven.
Exactly, because yeah, those are the prototypical fruits of paradise. That's what's supposed to be invoked here, right? This feeling for paradise. So you see grapes everywhere, and it's not just this picture. So I did cherry pick this picture. It's across all those mosaics. So
Thomas,
Jay, yeah.
Thomas, let me just. Can you? I'm just sending you something from Mel. Could you just go ahead? You've got it there on your email. I'm going to superimpose and show everybody to support what you're saying. Look what Mel just sent us. You got it there. Go ahead and read it for everybody.
Okay. I've got it on my phone. It reads, "Jay, take a look at this. To further your look into the idea of grapes in paradise, here is a recently discovered fresco in a monastery in the monastery of the Syrians in Egypt. It depicts Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob feeding the souls in paradise with grapes."
So here is another one, a very early one, in this case, coming out of Egypt, that proves again that these are grapes in heaven. You have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob feeding grapes to the souls in heaven. It looks like whoever took that and put it into chapter 55 and chapter 56 of the Quran, they changed it to huris, these women with translucent skin. That's supposed to be translucent skin of the grapes. Again, another example where this was quite a common motif. There it is on the Dome of the Rock, and here it is on that fresco in Egypt.
Right. So let's start wrapping this up now. Another jump now to 750. This is when the Abbasids take over. Almost all of the Umayyads are killed and their tombs are desecrated. And what we have in 756 is the tomb of the Prophet is built in Medina. However, at that point, it wasn't yet the tomb of the Prophet. It was a Christian sanctuary. And the inscription there is the last time that we see Muhammad used as the blessed one or the praised one. So at least in inscription that we know of, everything that comes later clearly is talking about the Prophet Muhammad. This is the last time that we see Muhammad being used as a title for Jesus. So we can tell this is sort of a time when things start to change. Now, now I'm jumping again, 825. And this is the year when Regent Al-Mamun moves from Merv to Baghdad. And this sort of the point where we would typically now draw the line between are we already looking at Muslims, or are we still looking at Christians? I think at this point we can now say we're definitely looking at Muslims. So this evolution now has taken place. So it was like a slow change from this middle of the 7th century to now the sort of the beginning to the middle of the 9th century, where we see this evolution going on. And it's really Al-Mamun who's cementing this understanding of Islam as it will be known later on. Even though Al-Mamun himself, he was actually more liberal than what Islam is today. So for instance, he would not have believed that the Quran is the word of God, or maybe, no, that's wrong. He did not believe that it's internal, let's put it that way, or uncreated. And he was also open to the Quran being wrong, because when he was told that the Quran says that the earth is flat, but that his astronomers say the earth is round, then he had them calculate the circumference of the earth. And they were pretty close. So he was more open-minded. What we also see here is the beginning of Islamic fundamentalism. Back then it was called Hanbalism, after the school of Hanbal, who had a very literal interpretation of the Quran, which also tells us that by this time the Quran was definitely understood to be scripture, because otherwise you wouldn't take a literalist approach to it. Al-Mamun actually fought Hanbalism, but eventually sort of the more literalist faction won out over the next couple of centuries. But what we also see at this time is this so-called Persian Renaissance, and this coincides with what's usually called the Islamic Golden Age. It's really more aptly called the Persian Golden Age, because those local Persian rulers, they now become ever more powerful, ever more important, and they bring in their Persian understanding of philosophy and of science, and that's really what kickstarts this Islamic Golden Age. So Al-Mamun also brings that with him when he comes from Merv to Baghdad, where he founds this the famous House of Wisdom and so on. But that's really a remnant of this Persian tradition and part of this Persian Renaissance. And we can see those ruling class, this Persian ruling class, become ever more independent. So here I've highlighted the area of the Tahrid dynasty. So they would still recognize the caliph as sort of the head of state, but they were largely independent already. But then later on, other families, they would just be wholly independent, and that's sort of the decline of the Abbasid Empire is when those Persians become more and more independent. Until the Turks just conquer them all. I think actually, yeah, Turks. What we also have around this time, around 825, is the so-called Chronicle of Sirt. That's the history of the Nestorian Church, which was written around that time, and it deals with everything, like from the formation of the church until the Arab takeover. And first of all, we get a lot of information, for instance, about those deportations, because those are all chronicled in there. It tells us which cities had bishops at which times and so on. So it really tells us a lot about how this Nestorian church evolved in the Persian Empire. But it also tells us about the Arabs, because from the Christian perspective, like the Christians who wrote this Chronicle of Sirt, they saw the Arabs as liberators from Zoroastrian oppression. And now I have a quote from the Chronicle, and it reads, "The Arabs treated them," so them being the Christians, "the Arabs treated them with generosity, and by the grace of God may he be exalted, prosperity reigned, and the hearts of Christians rejoiced at the ascendancy of the Arabs. May God affirm and make it triumphant." So that's not how we write about a people who would bring in a new religion, right? That's how you talk about people who support your religion, not enemies of your religion. You wouldn't want them to be triumphant. And throughout this Chronicle of Search, there's no mention of a new religion. So on the ground, so even though I just said, so this is probably the time where we look at the new religion, where we tip over from sort of this anti-Trinitarian Christian religion into Islam. On the ground, people probably didn't notice it yet. I think that's something you only see when you take, or like from centuries later. Because for the people on the ground, it was like a very slow and gradual process. So they even though they wrote it around this time, they didn't see it as a different religion yet. And now I want to end with sort of the same map that I started only 600 years later, and that's the Aramaic speaking regions. What you can see is that sort of this Arabization policy that first was introduced by Abd al-Malik really took root, and Aramaic has almost died out by this time. And that is why the people couldn't understand the Quran correctly anymore, because as Christoph Luxemburg showed, there's a lot of Aramaic in there. Initially, those people would be fluent in both because Aramaic was so important. Now Aramaic is basically gone, and yeah, that's how we got to where we are. And I've got one more slide here where I sort of had some main events here collected on one slide. So in 250, around 250, we have the deportations under Shapur II. In 325, we have the Council of Nicaea. In 410, we have the Council of Seleucia Ctesiphon. 540, deportations under Khosrow I. And most importantly, 622, the Arab independence. 681, Abd al-Malik becomes regent, and he really brings in this Arabization policy, and he changes the nature of the caliphate, really. But we will look at into this in more detail later on. 694, Dome of the Rock is completed, and then 825, Regent al-Mamun moves to Baghdad, which is sort of this cutting off point, which is its tipping point. And in the background, you see those darker stripes, and those are supposed to indicate the times when there was war between either the Roman Empire and the Sassanids, or the Byzantine Empire or the Sassanids. You can see they were, for most of the time, they were more at war than at peace. There's sort of a somewhat peaceful patch here between 300 and 500, but that's mainly because they were busy fighting invaders from everywhere. That's the migration period. And both the Sassanids and the Byzantines or the Romans had bigger fish to fry than fight each other. So they were constantly at war. Yeah, and that's the end of this episode. Here's a summary. I have the Near East was under constant tension between Byzantines and Sassanids, as we've just seen, constant war. And the Arabs were caught in between. They were clients on both sides, basically. But by 600, all of the Byzantine Empire and large parts of the Sassanid Empire were Christianized, including the Arabs. After the Sassanid-Byzantine War, Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and later also Persia fell into Arab hands. The new Arab rulers were anti-Trinitarian Christians, and by the 9th century, their anti-Trinitarian Christianity had evolved into a new religion, which is Islam. And we will later look now in more detail how this exactly happened and what it exactly means. What does it mean to be an anti-Trinitarian Syrian Christian? How did this move or morph into Islam? But for now, we're at the end with this presentation.
Okay. Hey, listen. Thanks a lot, Thomas. Woo. You've gone from 250 all the way up to the late 9th century. You've got all the way almost 800 years in just this video. But this is good, because what you're doing is you're giving us an antecedent to see how it all came into being. We've got to know what happened first to know why then Islam then came out of this. And it was interesting that you start with 250, because that's where you wanted to show us where Christianity was really spreading, and it was spreading east, and it was taking Aramaic with it. Important, because that helps you with help us understand why these lectionaries and these
exactly. Exactly. The official language of the Church of the East, which was the Persian Church, was Aramaic throughout all the those centuries.
Yeah, that's so important, because that now
Mhm.
helps us understand why we need to go back to the Aramaic to understand even what the Quran, how the Quran was put together. So that goes way back to 250. You're saying you showed how by 325 it becomes stronger, and by 410 it moves into Persia. So now it is moving east into Persia. By 540, the Byzantines up here in the west and the Sassanids over here in the east start warring with each other. And you have that big battle going on, which continues up until the 600s. Christianity continues to grow. It moves east, goes into what is today Iraq, and further east into what is today Iran. But then they get weakened, and you around 602, and they start to pull back. And Khosrow II takes advantage of this, you say, and he starts confronting it. He starts going west. He starts going west to confront now the Byzantines. And they push right up to Constantinople by 621. Almost make it, but then Heraclius, good old Heraclius, comes in around 610. He starts to increase his power, and he is able to then to push back the Persians back east again. And he finally defeats the Sassanids in 622. Huge date, because as you say later on, that's the date of the Arabs. Once Heraclius eradicates the enemies of the Arabs, the Sassanids, the Arabs now come into their own. Their identity is starting to be formed, and that is important, because a lot of people don't realize that. We've said it before, and I know that that Odon has talked about it. I know that Mel has talked about it. I've talked about it. That 622 is hugely important because of that event. And then you go to 628, where the Byzantines could not control that area, so they let that whole area of the world, what is today Syria and Jordan, and what is today Iraq, and even Persia, what it would be Iran, they just let the Arabs control it, because as client states. And you see that, and I thought it's interesting, you went to the coins to prove that your point. How many times have we said that? Go tell me stuff, what's happening on the ground. Look and tell me what's going on the ground. The coins are on the ground. The coins are there. They're pristine. They're made out of metal. They don't disintegrate. They don't deteriorate. The coins show you the sequence that's going on. And you see these client states starting to show their authority by putting their images and their names and and you see this. We've said this so many times. Odon has done a great job on the coins. Thanks for bringing the coins in. And you go up and you talk about how these client states start doing that in 641. By 651, all the land that was there that had been Persia and Byzantine in that part of the world now came under their Arab clientele. And then you get Muawiyah, and Muawiyah in 661 comes to power. He has an Aramaic name, but he's an Ishmaelite. So he comes from that line. He sees himself not as a Christian or a Jew. He sees himself as the line of Ishmael. And it was a great looking at that coin. So as he lives there in Damascus, and he has John the Baptist's head there on the coin to show where he plays his lead. So he probably could have been a Christian. We don't know, but certainly the coin seems to suggest so, because it has a cross on it. Now, it's at that time, you say around that period with Muawiyah, that you get the Arab calendar. And the Arab calendar, you're 99% sure on this, that the Arab calendar points to 622 as the beginning of the Arab identity. Remember, the Arab identity is in contradistinction to the Byzantine Christian identity. So this would make sense that 622 became so important. I love what you did. And I'm not going to say that I'm going to agree with everything you said, but you went back and you looked at all these political dates that had happened. And you said in every one of these political dates, the later Abbasids took those dates and they applied their narrative to those dates. So these are real events that happen on the ground. But you're saying the Abbasids then put a Islamic narrative onto those dates. This is the time when Muhammad was born. This is the time when he started revelation.
Just be sure, I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying I've looked at it to see if a pattern emerges, and it's kind of a pattern. But I'm not saying that this is this is connected, right? I'm not saying they deliberately added this narrative to fit the calendar. It could be, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
And Odon actually agrees with you on this. Odon says much the same thing. He says, listen, the Abbasids had a little bit of a problem because there was such a huge memory, the Umayyad memory of all these events that had happened by the Arabs. You can't just dispel and throw it all out. What you do is you reinterpret it. And so they reinterpreted by putting their own stories. So instead of the Arabs finally getting their identity in 622, that becomes reimagined as the Hijrah.
Yeah.
So that I don't see any difficulty with that. But nonetheless, what's fascinating, you move on through Muawiyah, and then you say that that in 681 he is deposed. We don't know how, but what we do know is that Abdul Malik comes to power. I've always been told it's Marwan because I've been going to the Islamic narrative. Says it's Marwan. No, the coins say differently, and that's why you need to look at these coins. The coins say very clearly that this happens in 681. Abdul Malik, possibly Marwan was there, but Abdul Malik then takes on that identity. And we know that Abdul Malik is the great Arab reformer. That is well known. He is the one that builds the Dome of the Rock. He is the one that has the coins. The coins are very clear that he is the one that introduces the name, the praised one. And what you're saying, and you agree, all of us agree with you on this, that the praised one that's on the Dome of the Rock, the praised one that's on the coins, the praised one that's also on the protocols, all of these are probably referring to Jesus Christ, the praised one. I would suggest, to me, that's a no-brainer, because when you look at the other inscriptions on the Dome of the Rock, you have chapter 4, verse 171, say not three, for God is one, and he has no son. That's referring to Jesus Christ, attacking his divinity, attacking the Trinity, attacking his sonship. You have chapter 17, verse 1, where he begetteth and is not begotten. Then you have chapter 112. Chapter 112 today, I'm referring to the Quran today. That's where these Quranic verses are there on the Dome of the Rock, and they're all attacking Jesus Christ's divinity. This is an Arian attack. This would make sense from someone from an Arian anti-Trinitarian viewpoint would be attacking. So when you have finally in chapter 112, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, well, that La ilaha illallah, there's only one God but one God. That's saying, it's not Jesus. There's only one God but God. And this praised one is nothing more than a servant of God. That would make all the sense in the world. You're still referring to that which you referred to earlier. So that would make sense. I love it. I love how you brought those grapes out. There they are. They're on the Dome of the Rock. I never knew they were there. And of course, as we see, this is a narrative right from the 4th century, from the Christian narrative. It was the grapes in heaven that we're going to get to, not women, unfortunately, for all those guys blowing themselves up. Boy, they're going to be shocked when they get to heaven and see, well, if they ever get there, I doubt if they will, because you need to know Jesus Christ to get that far. So the Abbasids take over in 750, and you really jump into the Abbasids, and you talk about, now you're putting it much later. You're saying that this time during the Abbasid period, around 756, is where Muhammad takes on that mantle as a prophet.
It probably happened already earlier. I'm just saying the last time that we see Muhammad applied to Jesus is 756. So it could have happened already in other places earlier. But after 756, we don't see it anymore.
Okay. And then it's interesting because you don't have any reference to Muhammad's life, or you don't have any reference to his sayings until 833. Which is the 9th century. And you're saying 825, Mamun comes to power, and Mamun from Merv, he comes, and he is much more of a liberal. He is very clear. It seems that he accepts the fact that there are some problems with the Quran. You do know that during his rule, Al-Kindi writes that very devastating, damaging reference where he says, "What? Look at you who are talking about this book that is you're still putting together, piecing together." He is in the courts of Mamun. He is a Christian, kind of laughing at these Arabs who are still putting this book together as late as the 820s. So this is the beginning of the 9th century where this is still happening. And many people thought that either Al-Kindi didn't know what he was talking about, or that it was done in error. No, it isn't. It looks like he is very current. This is happening. And you're agreeing with this. This book is now really being put together in a codified form, probably as late as the 9th century. When also then his biography is put together by Ibn Hisham in 833, and then his sayings finally start to come written down in 870 by Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Ibn Dawud, Tirmidhi, and the others, up until we get to Al-Tabari in 923. So all of this, you can see, if you just follow it on the ground, does fall into a piece. Thanks so much for doing that. You went from 250 all the way up to 825, 600 years. God bless you for putting it all into one talk. We are going to get some comments on this, I'm sure. And it'll be great to see when you go into this Syrian anti-Trinitarian material that we're going to do next. I can't wait for you to do that. I'd love to see how you come up with that, because it looks like we need to see what was happening on the ground. Again, we need to look at the arguments, the theological arguments, to understand why Islam came out of that root, came out of that Aryan root, this anti-Trinitarian root. We all know that because we can all see that today. That's the first thing we get attacked with by all Muslims. They've been anti-Trinitarian since their very inception, but this inception did not come from a revelation from heaven. It looks like this was an internecine squabble that was going on by groups that were there in from the 7th century. Terrific. Now, listen, for the rest of you, you've been listening to what Thomas has been saying here. You've been hearing what he's done with his whole swath of history. Do you agree? Do you disagree? You've done a great job of coming back to us and coming back on Thomas. This is why he's here. You can see he has been responding to you there in the comments. Go and confront him again or agree with him. Or are there other things that he has missed? Is there some area that maybe we need to know about? Let Thomas know, and we will come back. We will take the best of the comments and we will come back and we will refer to them, and I'll have Thomas respond to them. Any last thing you want to say, Thomas, before we go?
No, just looking forward to the next video, I guess.
All right. God bless you. This is Jay and Thomas, 4,000 miles away. Over and out.